We back on 88.7 KWDM The Point for another episode of Before the Buzzer on 88.7 KWDM The Point. I'm Ian Nelson alongside Johnny Reynolds and Cole Sunderman, and we are ready to start this week off strong, covering and previewing all the Valley Athletics, and then also recapping some of those events and recapping the biggest event in NFL to start this season. The NFL draft happened this weekend, and we will go over that. But Johnny, Cole, let's start it off.
Yeah, let's start off with some soccer, specifically the boys, the defending champions of 2025. You know, a lot of high expectations this year, and to be fair, they came out to a really good start to start the season, beat a good team in Ankeny and Cedar Falls, had that tough draw to Dowling, and kind of after that, it's been very up and down for the Valley Tigers, tying to Southeast Polk, losing to Kennedy. They were able to get a nice win against Marshalltown, but they did lose to Waukee Northwest 3-0 last Tuesday, which is a big loss for them at home, a team that you really want to beat, and they definitely fell in the rankings. They played Bettendorf, I believe it was Saturday, down in Iowa City.
And they tied that one.
They did tie that one, and they got a big game against Centennial at Ankeny. So it's really time to start turning it around for the good. We've seen a lot of different players getting into the game as he's trying a lot of new things. But this team has a talent, not as experienced as last year, but they definitely do have the opportunity to do something special. But they really have to get things going here.
Yeah, and with a less experienced team, like you mentioned, it can be challenging when you lose a couple of games. And I have been impressed with how they haven't let one loss really compound into 3 or 4 losses. But they haven't really been able to hit that stride that an older team might be able to hit a lot easier. So I think that this Ankeny Centennial game is really a big opportunity for just them to prove to themselves that they are what a lot of people thought that they would be before the year, and that they still have a chance to live up to those expectations.
Yeah, and this is really where the season hits that stretch. You come out of Bettendorf with a tie, and this is where you can either turn around the season for the better or really just lose it all. You have Ankeny Centennial, and then you have a really tough matchup against Urbandale, then Johnston, Ames, Waukee, Lincoln, and then the year off with a scrimmage against Van Meter before. Is that right? Well, it's weird. They have Van Meter in between Substate 1 and Substate 2, but to end the year off with a win against Lincoln alongside potentially a bunch of wins, hopefully no losses, only draws would be exactly what they need. But, yeah, you mentioned it, Johnny and Cole. Coach Aziz Afar adding in quite a bit of people, keeping the goalie rotation going, just trying to find a fit. And I think the Ankeny Centennial game tomorrow is going to be where we see if they can win a big CIML conference match on the road, it can really set them up. But if they draw or lose, that is where the warning sirens start flashing, and they're going to have a conversation about how far can we make it throughout the rest of the year.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's time to say that we have to put up the panic alarm yet, but you do have to think about it, because they were so good last year, and they did lose guys, but they still have guys coming back from that last team, and it just doesn't quite feel the same right now. So this is really a key stretch, and even if they don't beat Ankeny Centennial, just be competitive. Don't get blown out, because Dowling played Ankeny Centennial and lost to Centennial 6-1. So Centennial has shown that they can really handle teams, and Valley is a team that tied with Dowling. So this really is a key test to even see, even if they lose 2-1 or something like that. Obviously, it's not great, but it's not the worst thing in the world if they can just prove to themselves that they can hang in with those teams like I think they did earlier in the year when they were playing a lot better. So if they can get back in that in that role, then they'll be in a pretty good spot.
And yeah, and we've been mentioning just how big the Ankeny Centennial game is, but I think the biggest factor is the new updated IHSSA soccer rankings. Ankeny Centennial comes in at number 2 in the state, just behind Johnston. And then looking down the remainder, you have some of the top teams in the state still on the lineup. You go at Ankeny Centennial, number 2, and then the next game is at home against number 6 Urbandale. The following week, you're at home against number 1 Johnston, and then you have Ames, Waukee, and then number 9 Lincoln is your final game of the season at home. And just what a gauntlet of a schedule to end the year. 4 ranked matchups and 2 very solid teams. Ames, which beat Valley last year at the start of the season, and then Waukee, another strong CIML opponent. This is going to be tough, but Johnny, I know you had some thoughts.
Yeah, definitely a gauntlet of a schedule for sure, like you said, Ian, but you really got to come into these next 2 weeks with full focus because you can really turn your season downhill with 3 straight losses in Centennial, Urbandale, Johnston, teams that are, ranked ahead of you. So, yeah, you're expected to lose those games. You're underdogs. So they really have to go into a mentality that they're just as good as these teams. I think they're just as good as these teams. They got to really put that into their brains. I think, the defending champions hasn't really hit them yet. They have the talent, and, the Centennial game, yeah, it's going to be tough. If they can even draw that game, I feel like that's a win. That could put a lot of confidence going into the Friday game against Urbandale, which you are hosting. So you're going to have that home field advantage. And then you played a Johnston team, a team that you beat in the state championship. Obviously, they're going to want it out for you. So these teams are all going to play very competitively. And if you treat these games, not to the best abilities or they're slacking off, then you have an Ames game where, they're pretty solid as well. And you kind of finish with Waukee and Lincoln where you should take care of those games. But Lincoln, a team that is always very sneaky, made it to the sub-state final, was a goal away from beating Ankeny last year. So this schedule, I think, is probably the hardest stretch out of any CIML team.
Yeah, and this is where that lineup for Valley, you mentioned it, Cole, how it's been interchangeable all year. This is where it's going to finally get tested and where they have to show their strength. And it's going to rely on 2 youngins and one of their senior captains. You have, I believe, senior captain, but one of their senior veterans, senior Leighton Huckey, the leader on their team in goals scored with 6. He was in the running for Iowa High School Player of the Week through the Des Moines Register just last week. And then you also have number 7 and number 8, Saidi Ramdani, the sophomore, and then Trey Newman, the other sophomore, both with 2 goals on the year. Those 3 lead the team in goals scored with 6-2-2 respectively. This is where they need to lock in, as to say, for the year. He has been so good at finding the net when the Tigers need it, but they have been a little quiet as the weeks have gone on, going scoreless against Waukee Northwest, only putting up 1 on Bettendorf. This is where they really need to get their legs moving, and also Saidi Ramadani, one of the fastest players on Valley's team. This is where the speed needs to get seen, because in that Waukee Northwest game, watching it, one of the things they struggled with was they were really boxed up and they weren't letting their speed talk for themselves. There were multiple times where if they would have just rushed that ball a little quicker, a little earlier, they would have had wide open space for a potential better shot on goal than what they were going for. They were setting up most of their plays of get a goal kick, get a corner kick, and then try to head it in. But this team is very good on when those fast breaks are. And with a very speedy team, if you can start the fast break and be the one on the offensive side of the fast break, get that open net goal. That is what they need to do in these 3 games, especially against Centennial, Urbandale, and Johnston.
Yeah, big things ahead for the boys. But moving on to the girls, they took a little bit of a tumble in these last couple games, but they're still holding off very strong, still ranked number 2 in the state behind Northwest. And speaking of Northwest, they took a very competitive, tough loss at Northwest. Romy Crowett, who we call her name in basketball, hit, a spectacular shot, beating the Tigers. So that game was incredible. A game of the year, like we said, but Northwest, such a good team, and they were able to outbeat the Tigers.
Yeah, and we talked going into this game just how big of a test it would be, and I think that even though they lost, I think that they did show that they can hang with the top team in the state, and I think that Waukee Northwest now with this game being 2-1, Valley and Northwest, I think that Northwest really showed that they are probably the class of this level right now, but Valley they're able to stick around and just showing that they are still on that level of Waukee Northwest was really good to see, because if they got down big early and just really weren't able to get anything going, then that would be obviously very concerning for the state championship hopes, because this team does have goals and aspirations of being that top team in the state. So this Waukee Northwest game, even though they lost, it was still a encouraging sight to see.
Yeah, they really should fight, especially going down 2-0 early. This was a team that they responded, scoring a goal, and they had opportunities on goal late into that game to eventually tie it, or even with the multiple attempts, a chance to win it. But I think this is a game, and talking to some of the girls soccer players, where they said Waukee Northwest is a strong team, but they have their weaknesses like any team, and that as the season goes on, they are ready and they know what they need to do now. And I think that was a game showing the strength to get a goal in, so it's not a 2-0 loss for them, and then have opportunities. Was a very, like you said, Cole, good sight to see for potential in the future. And then the last two most recent games, a win against Lewis Central, and then a loss to Lincoln Pius X, or I think 5, whatever you want to call it. For those that don't know, Lincoln Pius plays out of Nebraska. They're the second best team in girls soccer for Nebraska, according to Max Preps, and the 32nd ranked girls soccer team in the country. So a very strong team, and to keep it that close for Valley, I think, is a very good thing to see, especially after questions after the Waukee Northwest game. So to have this one under their belt now, 2 very solid programs, getting that experience, I think, is a good sight going into this home stretch of this season, which the competition ramps up. They have Ankeny Centennial. It is the same schedule. The only difference is they play Dowling and DCG to end their season, but except for Lincoln.
Yeah, they can definitely go on a big rumble here. I think the girls, like you said, Ian, after that game, Northwest game, you really learn a lot about your team. You learn about, obviously, your competitor, and this is where your team really starts to bond and connect and really find the star players. Obviously, there's a couple injuries on the girls' soccer team, and it's really unfortunate for them because they have such a great team this year, but it's going to rely on some of the younger players that will have to take advantage of the situation and really thrive on it, because they have a great opportunity to possibly win a state championship. And I know it's what the coaches and what the players really want to achieve, and I think this is a year that they could do it.
It really does feel like we're getting into that stretch run of the year where teams really can get hot and really get on a roll going into state tournament play. And it really does start tomorrow night against Ankeny Centennial, because they're undefeated, and they probably feel like they have something to prove, because they're still sitting behind Valley, who has 2 losses when Centennial has none. So they still have, Valley still has a lot ahead of them that they have to take care of, but at the same time, I do think that they've shown a lot, and I do think that they're in a really good spot coming down this stretch of the year, because this is probably their hardest game, one of their hardest games left on the schedule.
Yeah, Centennial kind of taking a rest after that Ankeny game to really get prepared for this Valley game tomorrow. And I think that's a really big advantage for them, because you're on the road at Valley. That makes it even more tougher. And I feel like, that road test, that road game can be, that that thrilling moment, and especially when a team is ranked ahead of you. So Centennial, I think they're really going to put up a good fight, and it's up to the girls. This is where you really show that you're a championship team, and if you fall here, it kind of stings with 2 CIML losses.
Yeah, so in conclusion, the Valley boys will try to get back on the right side of the win margin tomorrow at Ankeny Centennial against the second-ranked Jaguars in Class 4A, and then the girls will be at home tomorrow against a lower-ranked but still very hungry Ankeny Centennial Jaguar girls team. Moving on, the Valley track team was seen blue at the Drake Relays, and we have all of the results from it, so I will go over that. Starting with the girls, a white flag was in the hands of Morgan Carr, who won the first place 100-meter hurdles with a 13.99. In the shuttle hurdle relay, headed by Morgan Carr, they got second place. And third place in the 4x100 for the girls, 10th place in the 4x400 relay, 58th place in the sprint med, 19th place in the 4x200, and 11th place for Morgan Carr in the 100-meter. On the boys' side, they also had a white flag, first place in the Drake Relays record, 4x200, sixth place in a Valley School record for Micaiah Lashur in the 110-meter hurdles, 15th place in the 4x100, 15th place in the 4x400 relay, and 15th place for Micaiah Lashur in the long jump. Johnny, our resident track man, anything to say? What's the analysis?
Yeah, I think it's a really great sight to see on the boys' side of things. Just coming off from last year, there was just a little bit, a good amount of struggle throughout the entirety of the team, but really seeing, the sprints finally, stride to be such a good program. The 4x4 making Drake Relays, obviously the 4x4, such a competitive event. Unfortunately, they didn't make it to the finals, but you have to be really proud of that. And then Micaiah really putting up a great performance on the long jump. And then I think that 4x1 is continuing to improve. Obviously, they did get 15th place, but the speed that they have in the 4x2, I think hopefully this can soon translate to a higher ranking in the 4x1 if they put more things together on the handoffs. But that 4x2, obviously, they proved it with that record. And then on the girls' side of things, it's really impressive to see Morgan Carr kind of pick up on exactly what Emma Havengers left and taking over the hurdles, 110 hurdles champion, super impressive. And then, the 4x2 as well and the 4x1 doing a very good job on getting third place in the 4x1. So obviously they're very good, very top team in the state on that. And the 4x2 getting 19th place, obviously still very impressive, but hopefully they can drop that time down by the state meet and hopefully medal in Class 4A. But looking very good for the girls overall, and the boys continuing to improve meet by meet and looking to be kind of a scary team going into districts and state.
Yeah, and I think what stood out to me was that girls and just seeing those high placements. You have 4 top 10 placements with Morgan Carr taking a little bit of just a step back on that 100 meter, which she has led or been in that top conversation for much of the year. So having that experience going into this state meets is something to look out for, especially when it's going to look like a big competition against Waukee Northwest for the girls, who I think unofficially won the team title of the Drake Relays, winning 5, I believe, races on the girls' side of things and just dominating on multiple events, earning quite a few Drake Relays and all-time records. So, but going back to the girls' side of Valley, and what you mentioned, stepping up Morgan Carr on the Emma Havengers legacy and keeping the Valley excellence at the hurdles and being so close in that shuttle hurdle relay. Very good to see. And I was very impressed watching all of the different highlights and seeing how strong Valley looked, even though maybe some of the placements weren't as high as they would have wanted. Just how strong everybody was looking was a great sight to see.
Yeah, and going up against so many great competitors, you can't expect. I mean, obviously you want to win every race, and I'm sure all the competitors, every single one, I guarantee you, was going into each race wanting to win that race and wanting to do everything they could to win that race and every competition. So you're not going to win every single race. And you mentioned like a Morgan Carr who had a great performance, but also placed a little lower than she wanted in a couple of events. So you can't expect to be at the very top of every single event, but just the amount of really good showings that everybody had, and especially just the team as a whole. I was really impressed just how they were able to really have a lot of different disciplines all over the place. Were able to really have a nice performance at the Drake Relays.
Yeah, and really just a great sight to see for Valley and so many great performances. But we can't help but shout out other programs out there for some amazing races and field events. And starting off with Thursday, before all the storms and tornado warnings, we had the high jump, and sophomore from Waukee, Ajax Mulal, jumped 7 foot. It was a sight to see, and just an amazing performance. He has such a bright future. He missed 6'10" earlier at an invite just a few weeks ago, but was able to jump 7 foot at the relays. Truly a moment he will never forget.
Yeah, and the best part about these Drake Relays are just these big moments, because even though when you get a personal best or even a record, like at just a normal meet, that's great. But when it's on this stage at the Drake Relays or at the state meet, that's just a complete next level. And it's really something that really in all sports, when it's at the highest level of those top competitions, when you're putting your best foot forward, that's always the best part out of what you see from these events. And those athletes that wouldn't be recognized by just an average person, they're getting that recognition that they've worked for and they really deserve.
Yeah, and shouting out more, we mentioned him in the race before the Drake Relays, but Oregon commit Quentin Nauman from Western Dubuque, he triple crowns and wins his 7th total championship on the Blue Oval. Starting on Thursday, he repeated his title in the boys 3200.
That close, man, 54.
54 and 8:57.64, the best time in state this year. He followed that with anchoring the Western Dubuque 1600 medley relay, and again just closing out, showing his strength to close off runner-up Ankeny for a winning time of 3:26.84. And then the much acclaimed, what we talked about, the elite high school mile that he was running in. Nauman wins it with a 4:05.18 to cap off an incredible year. And he was also named the Robert Cram Award, which is given to high school boys the most outstanding performer at the Drake Relays for guys. He wins that alongside the Waukee Northwest Relays team, who wins the Gary Cooley Award for high school girls outstanding performers. So overall, a wonderful day. Anything else from that event, from the Blue Oval at the Drake Relays?
Yeah, I was just going to touch up on the Nauman situation. He ran 4:05 in the full mile. They added that addition to a full mile this year instead of a 1600. They still had the 1600, which Jack Crossland did win in 4:11, but they had that elite mile for Midwest schools. And it was, some even say underwhelming performance, because everyone was expecting that sub-4. He wanted it bad. It was decently hot out, but he went for it. He was obviously tired. He ran that 3200 and the distance medley before that. So obviously it was very hard for him to go to that sub-4, but we were all cheering it on for him. So hopefully at the state meet he can get something even faster. He ran 3:59 in the 1600. we'll see what he can get down to. His goal is to break the all-time high school mile record in 3:53. He's got a bit of work to do, but I have full confidence that he could do something special.
Yeah, and there was a lot more speed looking out east. There was the East Coast version of the Drake Relays. The Penn Relays happened also this weekend. And just in preparations for the 2028 Olympics, shouting out what you mentioned, the most acclaimed race in almost all of track and field, that 4x400, the championship title, it was won by Bolus High School and Quincy Wilson, the Olympic gold medalist as a high schooler. They won it in historic fashion. They won it followed by DC's Archbishop Carroll High School, followed by the Jamaica College, and then the surprise fourth place finish from Kingston College in Jamaica, who was the 4-time reigning champ at the Penn Relays. They get dethroned by two American high schools, and Quincy Wilson leading the closing out the charge for Bolus to win the 4x400. So a big surprise out of that one, but for all American track fans looking at 2028, a great sight to see because the future is in good hands, and Wilson will most likely, instead of being the alternative, will be a runner in the 4x400, assuming he stays strong and ready for the 28 trials in about a year or so. Moving on to other activities. Just a quick shout out the week before we move on to a recap of the NFL draft. Looking at the week, as we mentioned, boys and girls soccer play Ankeny Centennial. Valley Boys plays Urbandale on Tuesday, and there are a couple of girls golf meets Monday and Tuesday. The girls have a DMC invitational today in a couple of hours at 4:30. On Wednesday, the girls golf has a CIML triangular. On Thursday, they have another triangular between them and Waukee. And then on Thursday, Valley Boys plays Johnston in tennis. And then Friday, what would have been the Valley invite a couple weeks ago is now the Valley Boys quad and the Valley Girls quad starting at 4:30. That is also senior night for all the track athletes. Valley's Boys has a quad JV thing on Friday. And then there are boys soccer at Valley Stadium against Urbandale. And then they also have a JV3 duel on Saturday. That will close out the week, so good luck to all of our participating Valley athletes. And now we move on to the biggest event in NFL this weekend. It was the NFL Draft. And there we had a whole show previewing it, and there were some surprise picks. There was some teams that did great, some teams that are leaving question marks on the board, and some that are hoping their surprise picks will pay off. But we will get to that now. I think just asking, what stood out to you? I'll say first, which team stood out to you the most throughout the entire draft?
Well, throughout the entire draft, I think a lot of teams that were really looking to rebuild that had some pretty solid draft capital. You look at the Browns, you look at the Jets, those kinds of teams. They really did a pretty decent job. And when you think about a team, especially like the Jets, it feels like there's always somebody coming out of the woodwork that's saying, "Oh, the Jets are going to win the Super Bowl this year." I'm not gonna go that far, but I do think that they did do a pretty good job in the draft. You have 3 first-round picks, so it's hard to screw that up, and I don't think they even screwed up even one of those picks. I think a lot of people look at the David Bailey pick at 2 and are thinking maybe they could have gotten somebody better, but I'm a fan of David Bailey, and maybe you go Arvell Reese. It's really a point of just personal preference. So when it's just down to which one do you like more, then and it's really 50-50 split, then I really don't mind. It really just comes down to the coaches. So I think New York was one of my bigger winners of this draft.
Yeah, I'm going to go New York, but I'm going to go the Giants here
Okay.
because you're able to get 2 top 10 picks. You're able to get a guy in Arvell Reese from Ohio State, and then picking up a tackle, which you really needed, and one of the best guys in Francis from Miami. Then you're able to have some good picks in Colton Hood from Tennessee, and then able to close it off with 3 6th-round picks, getting more linemen, and then a linebacker from BYU and Jack Kelly. I think the Giants, it's not anything overwhelming, but it's what you kind of need to do to rebuild a team. And we've seen, obviously, some great glimpses of the Giants and Jackson Dart and the receiving corps continuing to improve. But with Malachi Fields joining the team in that 3rd round, I think this team can really take a big step up. They're fitting in those guys on the tackle side that they have lacked with terrible linemen over the years. So it looks like this Giants team could really make it for a turn within these next couple years.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to go with a team that felt like they were drafting every other pick, the Miami Dolphins. The 12th overall pick and the 27th, both in the 1st round, picking up Caden Proctor out of Alabama, and then going on the defensive side to pick Chris Johnson from San Diego State. And then what I think could potentially be one of the biggest steals of the draft, getting Jacob Rodriguez, the linebacker, in the 2nd round at the 11th pick of that round. Some might disagree, but I think just getting that star of a linebacker, now we'll see how he transcends in the NFL, but picking up that late in the draft and able to really just get a solid guy for their defense is exactly what they needed. And then every year they always come out with the team needs. This was a team that drafted every position that they needed. They got a solid wide receiver from Caleb Douglas out of Texas Tech, as well as Chris Bell from Louisville. They got their cornerback out of Chris Johnson. They got their edge rusher that they needed, Trey Moore from Texas. Another wide receiver, Kevin Coleman. They got their tight end and their safety. They did a very good job, and I was thoroughly impressed with how they drafted throughout that. And then picking up Max Llewellyn at the end of the draft from Iowa for just adding more depth to that edge rusher position. I think the Dolphins did a very solid job, and I think they won this draft.
Yeah, it really did feel like they were picking every other pick, and when you're in that position, it's just another one of those teams that really is in a rebuild position. And the nice thing about the draft, especially when you have a bunch of capital, is that you really don't have to hit on every single pick. And when you're a rebuilding team, if you have so much draft capital that you really don't know what to do with it, that's a good thing. And you can take some flyers on some guys late in rounds, and that's just a testament to just the preparation of really knowing what they were going to do. Because if you're kind of in an in-between, like say the Vikings, who were, I think, one of the weirder drafts of this year, I think that it just really does feel like there's a lot of those teams that are really committing to what they're going to do and really committing to that rebuild.
Yeah, moving on. There's always some picks that leaves you kind of questioning the decision-making. For you guys, what was that one pick that was the most surprising that you saw? It can be from really any round or a pick that you're surprised it went so low. But what is that for you, Johnny? You're all smiles anticipating this question.
He's going to steal my pick.
Yeah, I think I feel like this is such an obvious one in Ty Simpson. Yeah. And, Cole was talking about it, how he's just so unexperienced. And, yeah, I kind of, dived into this guy. And he really is. He hasn't showed that much. And then, there was some interviews and some release phone calls saying, let's go get to work. Let's break records, coach. And
yeah,
did Sean
make history, coach?
Let's make history, coach.
Yeah,
coach,
no.
That is the exact quote.
Yeah,
did Sean McVay really wanted this guy on the team. I mean, I know he wants Matthew Stafford as that guy, but he still has to compete with Stetson Bennett just for that backup job. And drafting him that low just really surprised me because, to be fair, I did expect him to possibly go in the first round very late, maybe from a team like the Cardinals, but going to the Rams team that early really shocked me when there were so many other guys available, or you could have really traded that pick away and got him later.
And,
Yeah.
and the Rams, like, they're in a win now mode, and they were really close to the Super Bowl last year, and this is a pick that it feels like they're trying to build for the future, which I understand. You want to do the thing that the Packers have done the last couple of QB changes, like they did with Jordan Love when they had Aaron Rodgers on the roster. But like, this is a much different situation. Like the Rams are legitimately one of the top Super Bowl contenders next year, and when you look at a team like the Packers, when Jordan Love was taken, like, it wasn't quite to that extent, and it felt like when you have a pick at 13, like, you can get an instant impact guy at that point, and taking Ty Simpson when you definitely could have gotten him later, it's really, really head scratching.
Yeah, I don't hate the pick. I just wish for the Rams it would have come later. I think, to your point, they are in a win-now situation. And in that situation, you don't go quarterback when you already have a star quarterback. And there are a lot of reports that Simpson would have fallen to that second, third round, potentially even third day. And that is where you pick him up. I think my surprise pick comes from, it may be a little of a homer bias, but from the Bears, Dylan Thieneman, safety. Now, it's not more of the pick. I like the pick. They needed a safety. They need more backfield coverage. But it was the fact that Thieneman fell to 25 when there were reports that he could have been a top 15 pick, and falling all the way to 25 when there were many other teams ahead of them that needed a safety, and the only other one coming before him was Caleb Downs. This was a guy, Dylan Thieneman, that the Bears had been looking at, but we're keeping more in the back radar with assumptions that he wasn't going to fall all the way down to their 25th pick. And to have him there, I think, was a little bit of surprise when a lot of the looking at for safety position was going to be more in that second or third round. The other thing that surprised me about the Bears was the no edge rusher pick, which was, we highlighted it in our show. That was a big need for the Bears, and they completely go against that, focusing more on other defensive and then offense depth. They get their safety, they get their defensive tackle, but they didn't get the tackle until the last round, or till their sixth and final pick, Jordan Vanderberg from Georgia Tech. And then they got center and wide receiver, which Logan Jones was their second-round pick, which was one that they did need as a backup for either later this year or next year. And then they get Xavier Thomas from LSU. And then the other surprise, Sam Rouse, tight end, in the third round, was leaving question marks when you already have a very solid tight end room of two. Now you bring in a third string. But I think it does say a lot about Ben Johnson. He loves to bring in that two tight end package multiple times a game, and it's what they run for majority of games. So to have a strong third string tight end, and then they signed a fourth string, it is trust the process, I feel, kind of draft for the Bears. But the last question before we sign off, which team missed? We talked about which team hit, which had the best draft. Which team just, in your eyes, missed this draft and really just kind of threw the bag at the wall at this year's draft?
Ooh, I'm gonna have to go with the Vikings in my own team. I just feel like, yeah, that first pick seemed, respectable, and Caleb Banks getting a defensive tackle, but I know they really wanted to work on some of these guys on that tackling, in which they did, especially defensively. But they didn't draft a cornerback till the 5th round, and Charles Demings, who, Yeah, he's from an FCS school. He's a lot to prove, but we don't really know how he's going to transition to the NFL right away. And the Vikings are still in need of some new guys on that corner spot, some fresh legs. Obviously, the defensive side has improved a lot, but I'm a little surprised that they didn't go, even for another running back potentially early. They did go heavy on the defense, but some of these picks just did not seem to hit, especially with the amount of variety that they did have. And even choosing a fullback in the 5th round just kind of seems ridiculous in my mind. But I just feel like there could have been so much more potential with this draft from the Vikings.
Yeah, and with that Caleb Banks pick, like there's a lot you could have done with that pick, because you maybe, like we talked about with Ty Simpson, like maybe you could have traded down and gotten more, and still would have been able to get a guy like Ty Simpson. With Caleb Banks, like that pick was probably a reach, and there's just, it doesn't really feel like the Vikings. I mean, they picked their center, which they really needed. They picked their center in the 7th round, and it just didn't really feel like they were very intentional with how they saw their needs and addressed those. It kind of just felt like they were throwing darts at the wall and hoping that one would turn out. And maybe Caleb Banks and even a guy like Dominique Orange out of Iowa State, like maybe they'll turn out really good. That could happen. But as of now, just not really knowing anything, it doesn't feel like they did enough in this draft.
Yeah, I think the team for me that kind of surprised me the most was the Cincinnati Bengals. This was a team that had a very drop-back year, going 6-11 on the year, and they needed a lot of help on the offensive line from that tackle and guard position with corner, wide receiver, and linebacker help. And they only drafted corner in the 3rd round from Washington, Takario Davis, and then they got their wide receiver, Colby Young from Georgia. They didn't pick up a tackle or a guard. Yes, they picked up 2 centers, Connor Lew and Brian Parker Parker II from Auburn and Duke. But they're both centers, and it leaves the question mark of you're picking 2 centers and not guys that are situated at that tackle and guard. You're going to make them most likely play out of position to fill that guard and tackle spot, and that raises some alarms for me, because we've seen guys that do go play very well out of position, just switching on that offensive line, but then there are guys that aren't accustomed to it and get bodied pretty easily, and that is where I kind of see, why didn't you pick an offensive tackle or guard when there were multiple available at the rounds that you decided to pick their centers when they picked in the 4th and 6th round? A lot of good options that were remaining, and they go center. Any final thoughts on the NFL draft?
No, I mean, I think all of this post-draft analysis, it's fun to do, but at the same time, what do we really know? Like, a lot of people are hating on the 49ers for their drafting and how they're such a terrible drafting organization, but they've still had success, and they've still been able to field really good teams. So, it really, obviously, some teams had better drafts than others right now, but it really doesn't matter until it all goes out on the field.
But yeah, couldn't have put it any better. We'll see later this year, once the spring starts to go, once teams finally knock down on their 63-man roster, but that is all in the future. But right here in the present, we thank you all for listening to our Before the Buzzer morning, afternoon show on 88.7 KWDN The Point. I'm Ian Ellison alongside Johnny Reynolds and Cole Sunderman. Thank you all for listening, and have a great rest of your week. Rocking out on The Point.